Welcome to Massey is Missing COP26, our series on climate change. I'm delighted to welcome you here at Massey College. My name is Nathalie Desrosiers, and I'm the principal of the college. Massey College is built on Indigenous lands, the lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. We want to acknowledge our duty of continued stewardship toward the land and also the great privilege that we have to be here. So today we're going to talk about music and climate and science. And I'm so delighted that we are having here a partnership with the ClimateMusic Project, and we'll hear from the executive director. And on this wonderful music production, Icarus in Flight, the composer will be there. And we'll also have senior fellow Dianne Saxe and one of our junior fellow who is both a violinist and also a scientist. So you're in for a treat. Dianne.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight for Icarus in Flight. As you hopefully all know, this is, 12th, 13th, 14th in a series of climate events. Massey is Missing COP26. They're all available on the Massey College YouTube feed. Please, if you haven't heard them, dip in, enjoy them. We'll have another one coming up at the end of May on climate and trade, and then we'll have new events in the fall. Tonight we have the great pleasure of hearing an original composition about climate and based on scientific data. We have three amazing guests. Stephan Crawford is the CEO and the artist who conceived and launched the ClimateMusic Project, and he will tell us a bit about the project, how it has reached people around the world through its powerful performances. And I'd certainly encourage you also to check out their website. He teaches he holds a graduate degree in international affairs from the Fletcher School. If you want more detail on everybody's bio, they are on the calendar, the Massey calendar website, and I think you'll see the links in the chat. We have the composer, Richard Festinger, who has garnered international recognition for his amazing compositions. He's been dubbed an American master and is a professor emeritus of San Francisco State University. Finally, we have junior fellow Gavia Lurtzman-Lipovsky. She's a PhD student in ecology and evolutionary biology, and she's also a violinist. So she is the perfect person to help us hear what is in this music and what does it mean? So how do art and science meet? So with that, Stephan, tell us, what is the ClimateMusic Project and why did you start it?
Thank you, Dianne. So the ClimateMusic Project is a cross-disciplinary and nonprofit collaborative that combines science with music to both inspire and facilitate action on the climate crisis. You know, as we move more deeply into this decade, every year will count and every person has a role to play. And yet, although most people are now aware of something called climate change, for still far too many people, the issue remains abstract and removed from the concerns of daily life. So at the ClimateMusic Project, we seek to make what may seem abstract personal and viscerally felt. Music is the vehicle through which we do this, music that is guided by science. We create music in many genres. The piece you're going to hear tonight is an extraordinary chamber work by the composer Richard Festinger. Before we introduce the piece more fully, though, we'd like to show a short video that provides an engaging summary of what we do, and I'll be around also afterwards for further questions about our work. Maybe shoot over to the video, please.
graph scientific data. I know how to read a graph, but it doesn't necessarily speak to me with a kind of an urgency, emotional or visceral component. That is something we so often associate with musical experiences.
ClimateMusic Project is one of many projects that's now setting out to communicate climate science in a very broad spectrum, hearts, minds, values, and I think that's an immensely important development.
I'm so pleased to be here. When I was approached by the ClimateMusic Project to compose work for them, we first had quite a few meetings with the administrative group of the ClimateMusic Project and the science team to decide what data we should use for this piece. And what we settled on was to use 3 data sets representing human drivers of climate change. So those include population growth, carbon emissions, and transformation of land use from natural uses to human uses. The piece lasts altogether about a half an hour, and that half an hour models about 200 years of historical time. Not strictly speaking historical time. The time period begins in 1880 and ends in 2080. So the last 60 years or so are based on scientific projections of how these different data sets will evolve over time. So the piece is divided into 3 large sections, each about 10 minutes long. The first runs from 1880 to 1945, which is a period of slow growth of population, carbon emissions, and land use transformation. The second section runs from 1945 roughly to the present, although the data projections into the future are based on data up to the year 2016. So that period from 1945, the end of the Second World War, until the present is a period of rapidly increasing exponential growth in these data. And the final section is, of course, very interesting because it represents projections of data. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change defines different possible scenarios for the future. And they do this in order to give scientists who are working in different parts of the world and in different labs a common set of assumptions to use so that they can communicate better and compare their results and observations better. Those are called representative climate path or representative concentration pathways, abbreviated RCP. And the last section of the piece is based on 2 of those, RCP 2.6 and RCP 8.5, which represent the best case scenario where everything is done beginning today to mitigate the effects of climate change. And the worst case scenario, RCP 8.5, which is the business as usual, we do nothing beginning today and do nothing for the next 60 years to mitigate the effects of climate change. So that's the piece in a nutshell. 1 year of historical time occupies it's between 8 and 9 seconds of musical time. We're going to divide the piece into 3 segments, into these 3 segments for you today. So let me just talk a little bit about the first segment before we hear it. The first segment is this period of slow, stable growth. The piece begins, as you'll hear, and if you imagine, this piece is written for string quartet, but if you imagine it being played on a piano, for instance, the piece begins in a very middle register of the piano, in a very narrow frequency range. And this frequency range represents, the frequency range is used to represent carbon emissions. So over the course of the piece begins in this very narrow band of frequencies from low to high. And over the course of the piece, it expands both downward and upward in frequency until towards the end of the piece, it reaches a range of about 6¼ octaves. Population growth in the piece is represented by density, by the density of musical events. So over the course of the piece, as population grows, there are more and more, the music is more and more active, which both has an effect of becoming a density, of intensifying density, and also an effect of increasing speed or tempo. And finally, the transformation of land use over the course of the piece is represented, the percentage of land, of non-ice covered habitable land, usable land on the surface of the earth that's adapted to human use, is represented by the percentage of musical sounds that are colored in some special way by things like pizzicato, which is plucking the strings of the instruments, or tremolo bowing, where the string players rapidly move their bow back and forth over the string, or a type of bowing called sul ponticello, where the bow plays very, very close to the bridge of the instrument, with the result of a very brittle sound, rich in high frequencies. So I think the thing that you'll listen for most in this first section is the sort of the calmness of the music, relative calmness, the narrow band of frequencies that very gradually expands, and the gradually expanding number of musical events per unit of time. And so I think that's a good place for me to put a semicolon, and we can listen to the first section of the piece.
Well, thank you, Richard, for that first part. Even the stable, slow part, it's really mesmerizing watching the trees turn into people. But Gavia, I'd like to start with you. As you know, we've made a real point during this series, Massey is Missing, to focus on the role of arts and culture in touching the hearts and minds of the public. The principal asked Ambassador Rosemary Carney and I to do this project to build public support for strong climate action, because the years keep spinning away and we keep going on as if we had lots of time, which we don't. And I forgot to say, please, to everybody in the audience, if you have questions for Richard or Gavia or Stephan, please put them in the Q&A, so we'll be getting to those at the end. But Gavia, what did you think? I mean, as an ecologist and a violinist, what did you hear that maybe we didn't?
So one of the things that struck me about this piece of music, and also the public perception of climate change, is how much changed over this historical period. We often think about climate change as being this really modern thing that started to be an issue in the 90s and more recently, but it's been going on for a really long time, since like the Industrial Revolution. And I think this first movement really, you can really hear that with how much has changed from 1880 to 1945, from the sort of calm but still tense opening lines to the much more melodically varied and rich latter portions of it.
Would you like to play this?
It would be so much fun to play this. It's so beautiful to sit and listen. And that was one of my other thoughts, is that like climate change data is so scary when we look at it, but this music is so beautiful to listen to. And that sort of, I don't know if it's a paradox, but that juxtaposition is a really interesting place to sit with.
For sure. Richard, when you listen to that again, I mean, I know you've heard it so many times, but what do you most want us in the audience to hear and take away from that first movement?
Well, you know, as Gavia was talking, I was thinking that really I had two main motivations in writing this piece. One was to make the data audible somehow in the music, so that the listener would have a clear sense of how this data is changing over time. And, you know, as I explained that, you know, in terms of the density of the music, the activity level of the music, and the frequency range of the music, and the colors used. And the other, I tried to organize it. I tried to use these data sets to organize things that wouldn't impair my own imaginative ability to invent melodic, harmonic, and rhythmic material. And I think I'm pleased with that I held on to the ability to do that. It's not, you know, one approach to this kind of activity is what's called sonification of data, where you just in some naive way assign frequencies to datum in a data set, and whatever you get, you get. And that wasn't the goal here. The goal was to create a piece of music. And I hope that that comes across to people, that comes across as music that's has its own musical motivations, as well as being controlled in a larger sense by the data sets.
Gavia, from listening, sorry, go ahead.
One of the things that's hard about composing music is that our ear wants to hear resolution and to like reach a finale and then be resolved, right? And climate data just gets worse and worse. And so one of the things I was really appreciating about listening to this was the increasing intensity without losing that sense of it being music. And I was sitting here being like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing to listen to. It must have taken such skill for you to write this. Yeah.
Well, Yeah, so you raise a really good point, which is that these data sets, if you were to look at a graph of population growth or of carbon emissions over this period of time, it starts. Let's see if I get it starts kind of flat, and then it goes like this. I'm not getting out of the frame here, but it goes like this. It's an exponential curve, and that's not a very musical shape. Musical shapes, music moves more in waves, and it gets loud, it gets soft, it gets fast, it gets slow. It has much more of a range of different types of activity and motion in it than just a simple exponential curve. And that was a real challenge, and I think a problem in working with this kind of data. How do you overcome the tendency of the data to just completely run away in this exponential growth?
I guess we're going to start to see a bit of that in the second piece. So the second piece is from 1945 until, I'm not sure what year you wrote it. What does the second piece go up to?
The second piece goes up to 2000, I think 2016. 2016 okay. is the date when the data projections begin. I actually wrote the piece in 2018, but data aren't always available for the here and now. So the scientific projections were based on data up to the year 2016.
All right. Well, let's hear 1945 to 2016.
Yeah, maybe I'll just say a couple of words just to introduce this. That you'll hear right away that the material is completely different from in the first part of the piece. It's already much more active and has much more tension in it. And because this is a period of exponential growth, the rate of change, the rapidity with which the characteristics of the music change is really much faster. And the music becomes more and more tense over this period, but remains focused on the same material that is introduced right at the beginning of this section. So here we go with 1945 to 2016.
Oh, Richard, that's really hard to watch. To see how much worse things have got over my lifetime. I don't know about other people, but certainly key dates in my life really jumped out at me as we heard it. Gabby, what did you hear?
So one of the things when I'm listening to music like this, I often try and listen to what each individual instrument is playing to isolate the parts and try to listen to them both individually and as a cohesive whole. And part of that's my curiosity as a violinist, being like, oh, what is the violin doing at this moment? How is it creating that sound? But as the music gets more complicated, it gets harder to disentangle what any one instrument is doing. And so one of the things I noticed as a big difference from this movement from the previous one, and particularly towards the latter end of it, was how much more complicated everything was getting, how much more was going on at once, and how hard it was for me to just pick one sort of line and follow it through. And I kept hearing other things that my ear would jump around between, which is obviously part of what the data is doing as well. It's more is happening as climate change is progressing. It's not only population growth, it's all of these things compounding.
Richard, you're still on mute.
Yeah, I guess that's an inevitable result of this of the approach I took, especially with the representing population growth by the rate of musical activity. It's also partly the musical style. I mean, the music is very contrapuntal. That is, oftentimes the different instruments are doing very different things at the same time that go together to make a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. But yes, it can be challenging to untangle. I mean, in a way, a composer wants that. You want the listener to meet you halfway, right? You want to create a kind of music that isn't just obviously assimilable at the first hearing, but that the listener has to work and finds pleasure in working to absorb all the information that's coming in. But of course, it is. I think it's easy to hear. I hope it's easy to hear how the density of the music and the activity level of the music increases over time, and how also the register expands outwards to the low register and to the very high register also.
I found those two quite easy to tell, that there were a lot more notes and they were much more over a much wider range, and that the musicians were working really hard trying to get it all in. I couldn't myself hear the increasing color in the notes, but then I guess I don't know what I'm listening for. What do I listen for, Richard?
Well, one thing is pizzicato playing, where the performers are plucking the strings rather than bowing them.
Yeah, that I heard. Yes.
Yeah, and this very rapid kind of rapid motion of the bow, which we call tremolo, is another technique. And there's some places where I use this technique of sul ponticello playing, where the performers play with the bow very, very, very close to the very end of the string near the bridge, which produces a very brittle metallic kind of sound. So those were the main coloristic devices that I used. But actually, the transformation of land use turns out to be a much less dramatic thing than carbon emissions and population growth. In fact, the land adapted for human use in 1880 is about 13% of the usable non-ice surface of the Earth. By 1945, it's only increased to about doubled, whereas carbon emissions, for instance, has about quintupled. And by 2015, the transformation of land uses, land adapted for human use, is only about 3 times what it was in 1880, whereas carbon emissions is, probably 50 times what it was in 1880. So this is something that evolves at a much slower rate and is not projected to evolve much more, really.
Well, that's because we've used it all up. But
well, no, yeah, we've only used about 40% maybe, but it's not projected to increase a lot more.
All right. Well,
that's notwithstanding things that are going on in the Amazon basin and other sensitive areas.
All right. Well, Gavia, any other thoughts or questions?
I am curious how you sort of assimilated the data for yourself when you composed the music. Did you look at the numbers and sort of think about what that might sound like, or look at figures, or like, how did you turn the quantification of this into music, into art?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yes, I had all the numbers, and I had to plan the entire piece out in advance. I divided, as I mentioned, the 1 year of historical time is represented by somewhere between 8 and 9 seconds of musical time. And so I divided this 200 years up into about a half an hour's worth of seconds, right? Half an hour would be 9 seconds per year. That 200 years is 1,800 seconds. That's 30 minutes. And then I divided all those seconds up into segments. For instance, the first part of the piece from 1880 to 1945 is divided into 13 sections of 5 years each. So each of those sections lasts about 40 or 45 seconds. And then within each of those seconds, then I knew how many events I wanted there to be, and what the frequency range would be, and what percentage of the events would be colored by some specialized timbre. So I had to do this for the entire piece before I started composing, and this was a very different way for me of working. So then there was a process of filling these sections with the right number of events, the right registers, with the right color, and shaping them into musical ideas.
So, Richard, we're now reaching the future, right? This third section is about the future, but you've got two different futures.
That's right. That we have the best case future, and we have the worst case future. The best case is where we do everything possible starting right now to mitigate the effects of climate change, and the worst case is where we just do absolutely nothing and keep doing what we've been doing. And so in the final part of the piece, you'll hear an alternation between two different kinds of music. And I think you won't have difficulty distinguishing between the best case and the worst case. Now, bear in mind that the population is still growing. In the best case, it's projected to grow to about 9 billion people by 2080. In the worst case, to about 12 billion. And carbon emissions, on the other hand, in the best case scenario, have peaked, and by 2080 will actually be a negative number. That is to say that the mankind will actually be removing carbon from the atmosphere more than it actually puts in. But in the worst case, the carbon emissions expand to about 116 times what they were in 1880, which is kind of takes your breath away. So you hear this alternation between two different kinds of music. One that gets increasingly calmer, actually, although it remains active since the population keeps growing. And the other kind of music gets increasingly more active, more athletic, and more almost chaotic. So again, I think you'll have no difference hearing the difference between the two. And then the piece ends with the best case scenario, with a very calm music that's actually brings back a lot of ideas from the very beginning of the piece.
Well, let's hope you're right. Okay, part 3. Well, thank you, Richard. I mean, the visuals certainly helped in case there was any doubt, but you're right. It wasn't hard to tell which future you were offering us, and I certainly know which one I'd rather live in. Matt, we're ready to take questions. Are there some questions for us? Right. So the principal, Natalie DeRosier, asked the question that I wanted to ask as well. Stephan, what's been your experience about how people react to the music and the graphics and the talk? Does it frighten them, or do you find that it motivates it into change? And have you been able to measure what the audience does afterwards?
I'm sorry, who's that question for?
Oh, well, I'll start with you, Stephan.
Oh, okay, yeah. We don't want to frighten people. We do want to help people understand what we're facing, but also make it clear that we have pathways to a much better future than we're otherwise headed towards. And so we really want to focus on the message that it's, we have enough time. The issue is urgent, but it's urgent only because we can still do something about it. And that's really what we want to point towards. The audiences, we get a lot of feedback. We've surveyed many of our audiences, and the reaction is pretty consistent across the board, that people appreciate the fact that they can really feel viscerally what they only previously read about or was sort of an abstract notion in their minds. So in that regard, we think that we're on the right track.
Stephan, do you have any information about what people, there's the reaction in the moment. Do you have any information about what happens after? Does this motivate people for action? I mean, I'm a lawyer and I talk about science all the time, and it's really hard to get people to move. Does music do better?
For our live performances, we always integrate an audience engagement segment after our performances, and actually, those segments are usually very, very intense because there's a lot of these performances really build up a lot of emotional energy, and I think our audiences really want to engage. They don't want to just go home and have all that energy dissipate, and we don't want them just to go home and have that energy dissipate. And so in that video you saw, we partner with organizations that can help people to take the next step. And whether that's learning more about the issue, taking action at home, or working through society to change how we're, sort of at a societal level. And we want our audiences to interact with those organizations, which provide those initial pathways to action. And also we provide information more generally about things people can do. So again, if you're doing nothing, start and learn more about the issue. If you're doing what you think you can, talk to other people and bring more people into the conversation. So we definitely are focusing on action.
Yeah. And I want to remind everyone in the audience, if you happen to miss our excellent session on arts, culture, and climate on November 19th of 2020, it's still available on the Massey YouTube page. And the last half hour was a sort of mini dragon's den from a whole group of local climate active organizations who want your involvement. And we had an audience choice vote as well. So go back and look at the November 19th episode and maybe pick one of those organizations to help. Okay, so the question for you, Gavia, from Fran, who's one of the founders of the ClimateMusic. She says, I appreciate your insights as both scientist and musician. Do you have any further thoughts about how music can inform the public? What can be done to improve the use of arts in engaging all in climate change action?
It's a good question. I think music is really important and powerful at both bringing people together and starting conversations and inspiring an emotional response to topics that are otherwise really cerebral, like climate change or other data-driven processes as well. I think visual art also has an important role to play here. I've seen really cool installments of using art to capture the public's interest about like restoration around riparian zones. Art and music is such an integral part of humanity across the world that I think it's a really important thing for scientists to really embrace when we're trying to communicate things. And as an individual who plays music, like I also really believe personally in that goal as well.
And do you think there's anything else that we could all be doing to bring this powerful world of art to more people, to get more action? Do you have any suggestions?
I mean, it's not really a suggestion, but better funding for the arts in general, I think, would really help.
Okay, good point. I'll take that as read. If probably the Premier's not listening tonight, but there we are. All right, Matt, any other questions? Okay, none that are showing up on my screen.
Dianne, could I just say to add to what Gavia was just saying, that that whenever the arts have a chance to have a seat at the table, it then becomes more possible. I mean, exactly what you're doing here with Massey College. This panel this afternoon gives the arts a seat at the table. I've been involved in a number of these things with Stephan and the ClimateMusic Project, and that certainly, Gabi is absolutely right. We need more money for the arts, but to the extent that people can think to include the arts in the conversations, that's a great thing.
Richard, have you seen any other projects that are using art or music to invigorate public action on climate?
Well, yes, there are some other things. Actually, I think there's quite a lot. In fact, there was just within the last few days, there was a conference of. I don't remember the name of it. Maybe Stephan remembers the name of the organization. It was one of the symphony orchestra organizations who convened a panel to talk about music being part of a conversation about climate. There's also someone, Gabriela Elena Frank, who's a composer in Northern California, who has made some efforts along the same lines. I think one of the things that makes the ClimateMusic Project unique is the meticulousness of the approach of using actual data provided by climate scientists to structure the music, rather than. I mean, I think I admire everyone's efforts to do this, but I think some of the musical efforts out there are sort of composers or performers trying to express how they feel about this problem, which is absolutely perfectly valid and wonderful thing. But this effort to build in climate data and try to reveal to the listener the data, the trends of the data through music, that seems quite special to me and very interesting.
Stephan, this is not the only piece of music that the ClimateMusic Project has created. Can you tell us about the other or others?
Yes, so we like to say that music is a universal language with many dialects, and our mission really is our focus is on bringing as many creative voices into this conversation as possible. So we just talked about, are there other musicians? We kind of want to provide that platform to allow other musicians working across many different genres to get involved and to create this type of music. And again, it's not competing with what Richard is doing, because they're totally different audiences, completely different genres of music. Currently, we're performing 3 pieces of music. One is looking at the physical science of climate change and its little hard to categorize, but it's sort of a pastoral piece that moves into kind of a rock and roll thing and then goes into more experimental music. It's also about a half an hour long. We have Richard's piece, and then we have a piece on sea level rise, which is jazz and spoken word. And currently we're working on 4 new projects, all again very different, from hip hop to old-fashioned rock and roll to other world beats, etc. So our goal really is to work with the most creative musical minds out there to create and find new ways to express this very important information to a public that otherwise may not really grasp onto it in a way that they do with music.
And to be clear, Stephan, the Climate Music Project is a charity, correct?
It's a nonprofit, yes.
It's a nonprofit, and you've been working on it as a volunteer, you and Fran and other people for many years.
Well, yeah, we're now in our 6th year, which is hard to believe, but we just passed our 6-year mark. We have 3 of us are on the executive team, Fran Schulberg, Lori Goldman, and myself. But then there are about 30 to 40 people, depending how you count, across the arts, sciences, and technology, who are affiliated and work on different aspects of the project. And over that time, there have been literally tens of thousands of hours of highly skilled professional work that have gone into this project. But mainly because we've been able to find people who are just so dedicated and committed and willing to roll up their sleeves and contribute. So it's been a really amazing process.
Well, thank you for all of that. And if anyone wants to see one of your other pieces or wants to arrange with the Climate Music Project to produce this piece again, where do they find you? ClimateMusic.org or info@climatemusic.org. But climatemusic.org is our website, and there you can sign on to our subscriber list and also take a look at our upcoming events, and then also send us a note if you're interested in booking one of our pieces. All right, well, fantastic. Gavia, Richard, Stephan, thank you so much, each of you, for your time tonight and for your skill and your insight. Certainly, I learned a lot this evening and enjoyed it very much. Thank you for that. Thank you for everybody in the audience. Thanks for those who asked questions. Just a few words about where Massey is Missing is going. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have one more session this spring. It'll be May 31st at noon, a really interesting piece on the conflicts and possible synergies between the climate crisis and trade law. And then we'll have a new series of events in the fall leading up to the COP26 that we were missing last fall indeed. The past episodes are listed on the Massey website under Our Work, the Climate tab, and all of the episodes, except for the En-ROADS workshops, are on the YouTube channel as well. So thank you so much for joining us today. Please tell your friends about it. If they didn't get a chance tonight, they can watch it on the YouTube. Thank you for joining us, and have a great night.